Hello guys, welcome to Online Web Tutor represented by Profotech team. I am Sanjay. We are learning CodeIgniter version 3 HMVC tutorial for beginners. This is our part 11. Inside this video session guys, we will discuss about database table migrations using or from modules. Concept of migration we had discussed successfully in our CodeIgniter playlist. Now this time we are going to see inside CodeIgniter HMVC tutorial, in which we will create some migrations from modules and migrate to our database table. So if this is your first video about migration, so let me discuss about what is migration is. So migrations are some files which basically migrate or create some schema or architecture of any table inside our database. If we back to browser, now inside PHP if suppose we want to create some tables, so just we have to type the table name and the column name and go button. So let's say that tbl underscore messages, and let's say that we want something column 4. If I press go button, so successfully after filling about the column name, data type and the respective length and selecting about the keys, we can create our tabular structure from this manual PHP layout. But this time we are not going to use this manual tool. We are going to create some files. On these files actually we will write our database table structure and we will migrate with the help of controller. By migrating those files, we will automatically dynamically create some tables inside this database. So let's get started about migrations. Back to CodeIgniter. Now let's say that this is all about our HMVC modules, which contains each modules into a hierarchical model view controller layout. Now let's say that we are going to make one more layout for our table migration, and let's say that this is known as student, because right now we have no modules with the name of students, so we can create that. So student. Now inside this student folder, I'm going to create some folders, and the first folder, let's say that about our controllers. So this is controllers. Again, let's say that we also want about the config folder, and inside this config folder, sorry, not inside this config folder, inside this student module folder, one more folder we want something called migration. Now if we open about student module, now as we can see that we had created about 3 folders called config, controllers and the migration. Now inside this config, I am to create the first file called routes.php, and the second file I am to copy from our application folder, and inside this config folder we have a file called migration.php. So I am to copy this file, collapse this config folder and paste inside this config folder. Now inside this config, now we have 2 files. So according to this module, we will do some changes according to this migration file. So firstly, we want to do migration enabled. So let's say that instead of false, we have to convert this value to true, because we want that we will do some migrations from this student module. So if we scroll down, now this is timestamp. So as we had discussed into deep concept or in detailed about the sequential and the timestamp. So just go through our CodeIgniter playlist series and watch our migrations. Now inside this I am to use called sequential. While using sequential, actually we have to make the file name something as given as an example. Now while writing timestamp here, we have to make our files now respective to this name. This is our timestamp and this is the name of the file. Inside here sequential, this is all about 001, 002, 003 and so on, concatenated with the file name. So this is all about setting migration type. If you scroll down, now as we can see that right here we have migration version 0, so let's convert into 3 or let's say 2, and right here now this is our migration folder path. Now by default, this is the migration folders basically pointed from our application root folder. But this time we are going to create migrations from our module. So this migrations folder, if we again go and rename this folder, this is all about, sorry, it's not two, it's about migrations. Now this migrations folder resides inside this student module. So we have to make something called modules, and here let's say student. Now modules folder, student folder, and this is migration folders. Now we have pointed about the migration path to this directory structure. So while making all these changes inside migration.php file, save these changes to this file and close this. Now we are ready to make our migration files inside this migrations folder. As we know that we have configured about the sequential, so we have to give our file name something called 001, and let's say that we are going to make a table, let's say add messages. This is a simple dummy table we are going to create with the help of migration and .php. So successfully we had created our first migration file. Now inside this migration file we are going to create a schema or the architecture with the help of code. Inside this file, firstly we need to create the migration class. So let's say class here, let's say migration underscore add underscore messages. This is same as the file name called add messages what we have written after the sequential number, and it will extends from ci underscore migration. Now inside this class basically we are going to define our structure. So all about the naming convention of the class extends ci migration we have to keep in our mind while making any migration files. If suppose we have made a file something called 002 add user, only add user, but while creating or while defining this class, suppose we have specified the name called migration underscore add underscore users. So extra adding s, it will not going to run this migration files. So basically we have to keep the file name as add messages and add messages here same for running this file. Now inside this class we are going to create a method. So let's say public function, and we have two methods defined inside every migration file. First is up method, second let's say public function, and the down method. It will create the structure and it will roll back the structure while getting any error. So let's say it create table structure and it will drop table structure. Now inside this up method we are going to create our table. So let's say this db forge, and here we have a method called add underscore field. Now inside this add field I am to define an array. Inside this array we have to pass our input fields, it means our columns. If we back to slide and let's open a new tab. So firstly let's say add messages table. So what will the structure we are going to make? Let's say that add messages table will contain our integer and it should be id integer, means data type should be integer, and the length let's say 11, and it should be auto increment and it should be primary key. Next we are going to add something, let's say user ID. It should also be int and length should be 11 and unsigned equal to true. So let's unsigned, and this property also concatenated with this ID parameter. So these are the things actually we are going to make with our table structure. Inside this table also we want, let's say subject, it should be varchar and length should be let's say 50, and let's say null, it means default value should be null here. Next we want something called messages, or let's say simple only message. It should be type text. Here also we will specify about the default value equal to true. So default equal to true here. So this is the structure, simple structure we want to make. This table contains 4 columns and these are the actual properties we have to attach with these columns. So back to our code editor. Now let's say that here the first column we want something called ID. So we have to specify ID. Second column we want user ID. Third column we want called subject. And the fourth column we want about message. Now each respective field we are going to make attributes of these fields. So here we have to define array. So copy this array and I am going to paste with each of the fields, because inside this array actually we have to specify the attributes of the columns. Now pasting it here and pasting it here. Now inside each individual array, so first ID should be, let's say, int type. So firstly we need to define about the type, and here it should be type integer. We want length about 11, so go here and let's say here something called constant. It should be 11. Next what we want about unsigned, so here we need to specify called unsigned equal to true, and also we want that auto increment equal to true. So here let's auto underscore increment and it should be true here. So successfully we have set all the attributes of this ID column, and also one more thing that we have to make it as a primary key. So scroll down inside this up method. Here I'm to define this dbforge and here add underscore key. Inside this add key method, the first parameter of the column name something called ID, and we want that this should be a primary key. All we have done now. Now we have to make the same attribute patterns for all these columns. So if I copy here, pasting it here, now this time this should be int 11 unsigned equal to true, and all we have to remove this auto increment, and one more attribute we have to add something called null equal to true, because this column will contain also the null value. If we again back to structure, now as we can see that okay, this column basically not going to contain any null value, so remove from here. Now copy this thing, pasting it here. Now this time this should be varchar, so let's say var char and the length about 50 and null equal to true. Now successfully we have done with the ID, username, subject, and now for the message column. So this time this should be text. We are not going to specify any constant here, and null equal to true. All we have done with the structure of the table. Now we have to create that. So this dbforge, let's say create underscore table, and inside this the table name we have to specify. So let's say tbl add messages. This is the table name. Now inside this down method, actually we have to write the code to drop the table while getting any error. So this dbforge, let's say drop underscore table, and inside this we have to pass the table name. Now we have done all about the structure or all about the migration files. Now we have to make a method inside our controller to run this migration file. Or before making that method, let's create one more migration files inside this migrations folder. So the sequential pattern, so 002, and let's add teachers.php. Now here we have to declare our class first, so class migration add teachers. It will extends about CI migration. Now inside this we have two methods to public function, up method which will create the table structure, and public function down method, which basically drops the table while getting any error. So now inside here, let's set this dbforge add field, and inside here we have an array. Now inside this array, firstly we have to define about the column names. Now here let's set this dbforge, we want to add a key, and the column we have something called id, and it should be auto increment or the primary key. And finally we are going to create the table, so dbforge create table. Inside this we have to pass the table name, so tbl underscore let's say teachers. And finally, while getting any error, we have to drop that, so dbforge here drop underscore table, and here we have to pass the table name, so tbl underscore teachers. Now we have to make our columns for our tbl teachers table. So here let's say call id, here we have call name, email, and let's only about designation. That's it. Now inside here we have to define an array. Inside this it should be type equal to int, constant equal to let's say 11, unsigned equal to true, and finally auto increment, and it should be finally true here. Now for the name field array, let's say that it should be type equal to varchar, constant equal to let's say 50, and null equal to let's say true here. Now if I copy the same attributes, so copy this, pasting it here and pasting it here, all we have done now. Only inside this designation I am to change this type to text here and remove this constant field. So now we have two migration files. If we save this file, we have called add messages, where we had created about the structure, as we can see about the columns, and I think that actually constant, so it should be constant. This is the correct spelling of constant. Now save all these changes. Now back to controllers folder, we are going to create a controller, something called student.php. Now inside this, let's say PHP tag, let's say class student extends about my controller. Now inside this, first thing first, that is for the construct function, so public function construct. Now here let's say parent and all about the construct function. Now let's say that public function run migrations. Now inside this method we are going to write code to run all the migration files. So before that I am to create a route for that, so let's say php route, let's say student run hyphen migration. It will run the method something called student, and inside this student controller we have called run underscore migrations, so pasting it here. All we have done with the route now. Now inside this controllers method we are going to write our code. So firstly, to run our migration files we have to load a library for that, so this load library, and that library is known as called migrations. So if I cut this load library and paste inside this construct function, now we are ready to write our code. So let's say that if let's say this load this migration, let's say current. Inside this migration library, we have a current method which basically runs our migration files. So all about this line, it will run about migration files. If it get any error, so inside this we are ready to print those errors. So print inside this, let's say this migration ls error underscore string here. Otherwise inside this else block, let's echo inside this h3 tag, let's say migration run successfully. Now if we save all these changes, now successfully we have done all now. So if we make some formatting, now copy the route. So this is all about student run migration. Back to browser. Now let's say that we are ready to run our migrations. So if we press our route, right now inside this database table we have only tbl underscore users table. Now if I press enter here, now as we can see that migration runs successfully. Back to database, reload this structure. Now we have 3 more tables called tbl add messages and tbl teachers. If we click on each of the table, go to structure, this is the structure we had defined, and inside these teachers, this is the structure we had defined. But we have one more table called migrations. It is because we have run our migrations. So this table basically indicates that some tables we had created inside this database of migrations. Now this table contains the migration version what we have specified inside our migration.php file. So successfully guys, inside this video we had seen about that how can we create our migration, as well as successfully we have migrated inside our database. While implementing about the migration concept in HMVC, one more point we have to keep in our mind is that while migrating any files inside any module, remember this will migrate to our root database connection what we have specified inside this config folder. As we know that inside last video we have made about respective connections of each module, so these migrations will not integrate or implement or created inside our, meaning migrations will not be configured inside our secondary database connections what we have specified. It will automatically create all the tables for our primary connection of the DB. So inside each of the module, if suppose we have specified about the different connections, so it will not create those tables inside those connections. And also if we will create these migrations to any of the module which actually working on the different connection, then this migration will give some error about the DB driver error. So while creating any migration files, remember that module basically works with our primary connection or the default connection what we have specified inside this database.php of config folder. So inside this video session guys, if you're in doubt, then please drop your comment. I will give my reply as soon as possible. So for this video session guys, thank you for watching and have a great day.